Today we're stepping into a world where talent often hides in plain sight and judgment casts long, unfair shadows. Imagine a place called Willow Creek High School, nestled in the heart of Harmony, Georgia. It's a town that prides itself on its close-knit community, but even in Harmony, there can be discord. Our story begins in the somewhat dusty, perpetually quiet music room, dominated by the formidable figure of Mr. Harrison. Now, Mr. Harrison wasn't your average music teacher. He was a veteran, sure, with a reputation that preceded him, sharp, precise, and utterly unwavering in his critiques. He had a way of making you feel your notes weren't just off-key, but morally objectionable. And if you happened to come from the right side of Harmony, with parents who donated generously to the school's arts program, well, you were golden. Your clumsy scales were promising, your tentative melodies inspired. But if you were like Leo, that was a different tune altogether. Leo was a ghost in Mr. Harrison's class. He sat near the back, his gaze often drifting to the chipped keys of the grand piano in the corner, a relic that seemed to hum with forgotten melodies. Leo's clothes were simple, worn, but clean, a quiet testament to a life lived without excess. When Mr. Harrison would ask for volunteers, Leo's hand, though often the first to rise, would invariably be overlooked. "Next!" Mr. Harrison would boom, his eyes sweeping past Leo as if he were just part of the furniture. Or, worse, he'd call on someone else, then lavish praise on a simple chord progression while Leo, who could execute complex jazz improvisations in his sleep, remained invisible. But it wasn't just a lack of attention. It was a constant, subtle dismissal that grated on Leo's quiet spirit. He'd seen it happen countless times. A wealthy student's mediocre attempt met with a gushing, "Excellent form, young man," while Leo's own technically superior efforts, when rarely acknowledged, would receive a curt, "Adequate. See me after class for remedial work." It was a systemic bias, unspoken but deeply felt. What Mr. Harrison, and indeed most of Willow Creek High, didn't know was the secret world Leo inhabited. Back home, tucked away in a small, cozy living room, stood an old, upright piano. Its keys were yellowed, some chipped. But to Leo, it was a cathedral. This was his grandmother's piano, a beloved instrument from a woman who had once played in smoky jazz clubs during the civil rights era. She wasn't just a musician, she was a fighter, weaving defiance and hope into every note. She'd taught Leo not just how to play, but how to feel the music, how to let it speak when words failed. Her lessons weren't about sheet music and perfect scales. They were about resilience, about finding your voice even when the world tried to silence you. This piano, these memories, were Leo's private sanctuary, a vibrant, soulful contrast to the sterile, judgmental atmosphere of Mr. Harrison's classroom. Then came the day the silence broke. Mr. Harrison, walking past Leo's desk during a rare moment of quiet, paused. Leo, lost in thought, was humming a complex bluesy melody one his grandmother had taught him. Mr. Harrison's eyes narrowed. He looked at Leo, a smirk slowly spreading across his face, a look Leo knew all too well. It wasn't curiosity. It was something colder. "Leo," Mr. Harrison said, his voice dripping with false pleasantry, "I didn't realize you had such musical interest." He paused, his gaze flicking to the dilapidated grand piano in the corner of the classroom. "Tell you what, tomorrow, first thing, you can show us what you've got. On that." He gestured dismissively to the old piano. Its keys yellowed and dusty, clearly out of tune. The challenge wasn't an invitation to perform, it was an order to fail. A calculated setup for public humiliation, designed to put the quiet, unassuming boy in his place once and for all. And as the bell rang, signaling the end of class, the tension in the room was palpable. Everyone knew what tomorrow would bring. But what they didn't know, what Mr. Harrison certainly hadn't accounted for, was that the quiet kid they'd all overlooked was about to unleash a symphony that would echo far beyond the walls of that classroom. The shadow was about to step into the light, and nothing, not even Mr. Harrison's iron will, would be able to put it back. The next morning, Willow Creek High wasn't just buzzing. It was vibrating with a low hum of anticipation, a mixture of morbid curiosity and a strange, almost uneasy excitement. News of Mr. Harrison's challenge to Leo had traveled faster than a rogue drum solo. Students whispered in hallways, their eyes flicking towards Leo's usually anonymous figure as he walked by. "Did you hear? Leo's playing the grand piano today. No way. The quiet kid, he can barely string a sentence together." The air was thick with the unspoken question, will he crash and burn? Leo felt the weight of every single one of those whispers, every doubting glance. It pressed down on him, a heavy, suffocating blanket of expectations. He knew what Mr. Harrison intended, not just for him to play, but for him to fail, to stumble, to falter, to confirm every preconceived notion Mr. Harrison and so many others held about him. This wasn't just a music performance. It was a public trial, a carefully orchestrated moment of humiliation, and yet, amidst the crushing pressure, a different voice echoed in his mind. It was his grandmother's, soft but firm, from countless afternoons spent hunched over the piano keys. "When they try to shrink you, Leo," she'd often say, her fingers dancing over the ivory, "play louder. Your music is your voice, and it's too powerful to be silenced." It's a common fallacy, isn't it? To judge potential based on what we think we see. We often mistake quietness for apathy, simplicity for a lack of depth. Many of Leo's classmates, influenced by Mr. Harrison's subtle disdain, genuinely believed Leo had no natural talent, that he lacked effort. They saw his simple clothes, his reserved demeanor, and filled in the blanks with their own misguided assumptions. They were blind to the hours of relentless practice, the calloused fingertips, the sheer passion that burned beneath Leo's calm exterior. It's a mistake we all make sometimes, judging a book by its cover, or in this case, a symphony by its silence. But even in the coldest shadows, a flicker of light can find its way. As Leo walked past his locker that morning, lost in his thoughts, a soft voice broke through the din. "Hey, Leo!" It was Maya, a brilliant artist from his history class, whose quiet intensity always reminded him a little of himself. She didn't say much, just offered a small, knowing smile and a subtle nod. No words were needed. In that simple gesture, Leo found a lifeline, a quiet affirmation that someone, at least one person, believed in him. It was a tiny spark, but enough to rekindle the fire within. That night, sleep was a distant luxury. Leo was hunched over his grandmother's piano, the only witness to his battle. His fingers, usually so fluid, felt stiff, heavy with the weight of expectation. He played for hours, not just mastering the notes, but pouring his soul into each chord, each melody. He played through the doubts, through the fear, through the burning desire to prove them all wrong. He saw his grandmother's face in the flickering lamplight, her eyes filled with fierce love and unwavering belief. This wasn't just about music anymore. It was about honoring her legacy, about standing up for every quiet soul who had ever been underestimated. The old piano, usually a source of comfort, became a crucible, forging his resolve. Each press of the key was a declaration, a silent promise that tomorrow he wouldn't just play for himself, he would play for everyone who had ever felt invisible. He was preparing to unleash a voice that no one, especially Mr. Harrison, would ever forget. The stage was set, the tension was building, and the unsuspecting audience was about to witness a symphony of defiance that would shatter all their expectations. The air in Mr. Harrison's music room that morning was thick enough to cut with a knife. Every student was in their seat, not a single whisper breaking the tense silence. Mr. Harrison stood by his desk, arms crossed, a thin, almost invisible smirk playing on his lips. He glanced at the grand piano in the corner, then fixed his gaze on Leo. "All right, Leo," he stated, his voice flat, devoid of any genuine encouragement. "The stage is yours." It wasn't an invitation, it was a curt command, a theatrical prompt for what he expected to be a spectacular failure. Leo rose from his seat, the subtle scraping of his chair against the floor sounding like thunder in the hushed room. He walked towards the grand piano, each step deliberate, the weight of 100 pairs of eyes on him. He could feel the doubt, the low hum of anticipation for a stumble. As he sat down, a muffled giggle rippled from the back, quickly stifled. He ran his fingers lightly over the yellowed keys. They felt cold, stiff, a stark contrast to the warm, familiar touch of his grandmother's piano at home. This was a battleground, not a sanctuary. He closed his eyes for a brief moment, picturing his grandmother's steady hands, feeling her spirit settle beside him. He took a deep, centering breath, and then, his hands, once hesitant, now moved with a purpose that defied his quiet demeanor. The first few notes drifted through the air. They weren't hesitant, clumsy chords, but something entirely different. A complex, soulful blues progression, rich with minor keys and unexpected shifts. It was raw, authentic, born not from sheet music but from a lifetime of quiet observation and deep feeling. The muffled giggles died instantly. The nervous energy in the room transformed. Jaws dropped, eyes widened in disbelief. Students who had been leaning back in smug expectation now sat bolt upright, riveted. Mr. Harrison's face, which had been a mask of confident expectation, began to shift. The thin smirk vanished, his brows furrowed. His arms, still crossed, seemed to stiffen. He had expected fumbling, a shaky amateur attempt. Instead, he was hearing something he hadn't prepared for, something professional, deeply emotional, utterly captivating. Leo wasn't just playing notes. He was telling a story. His fingers danced across the keys, a blur of precision and raw emotion. He wove intricate improvisations. Complex melodies soared over a deep, rolling bass line, notes colliding and resolving in perfect, resonant harmony. It was a language of defiance, a quiet rebellion against every dismissal, every overlooked moment. The room was utterly silent. Not just quiet, but breathless. No one moved. No one spoke. Even the most cynical students were mesmerized. Maya, who had offered him that knowing glance, sat forward, her eyes wide with awe. A popular, athletic student named Ben, who often cracked jokes about Leo, had his arms crossed, but his usual smirk was gone, replaced by an expression of pure astonishment. The music swelled, filling every corner of the room, every quiet space where doubt had once. Leo poured everything into it, his unspoken frustrations, his grandmother's lessons of resilience, the sheer, undeniable power of his own talent. He pushed harder, letting the final run carry the weight of every silent moment he had endured. And then it was over. The last note hung in the air, a shimmering echo of raw brilliance, before slowly fading into nothing. Leo lifted his hands from the keys, resting them gently on his lap. Not just a quiet silence, but a profound, almost sacred one. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. For a long, agonizing beat, the world seemed to hold its breath. Then, from the back of the room, a single clap. Then another, and another. Within seconds, the entire class erupted into thunderous applause. Students were on their feet, cheering, whistling, a crescendo of pure, unadulterated awe. Ben, the jock, let out a low whistle, shaking his head in disbelief. "Damn," he muttered. "I didn't know he could do that." But the loudest silence of all came from Mr. Harrison. He stood by his desk, rigid, arms still crossed, his lips pressed into a thin white line. His face was unreadable, a mask of shock, disbelief, and something else. something that looked very much like a dawning, terrible realization. The applause washed over him, but he remained motionless, frozen in the face of the undeniable talent that had just shattered his carefully constructed world. The stage was indeed set, Mr. Harrison. But the performance? It was a twist you never saw coming. The quiet shadow had just unveiled a symphony of defiance, and the echoes were just beginning. The applause, a tidal wave of stunned admiration, slowly died down, leaving an electric hum in the air. The energy in the room had fundamentally shifted, a palpable tension replacing the earlier, comfortable order. Leo, still seated at the grand piano, didn't smile, didn't bask in the glow. His gaze, calm and unwavering, locked directly onto Mr. Harrison. The teacher, still frozen, finally managed to regain some semblance of composure, though his face remained an unreadable mask of disbelief. "Well," Mr. Harrison began, his voice clipped almost a whisper, "that was unexpected." Unexpected? The word hung in the air, hollow and insufficient. The students, who had just witnessed a raw display of genius, exchanged incredulous glances. This was the moment. This was the crux. Leo took a deep breath, and his voice, usually so quiet, resonated with a newfound, steely calm that cut through the silence. "You didn't think I could play, did you, Mr. Harrison?" Leo's words were not accusatory, but a simple, undeniable statement of fact. Mr. Harrison's eyes darted, searching for an escape, but Leo held his gaze. "You brought me up here to prove me wrong. To watch me stumble." A ripple of murmur spread through the class. The unspoken truth, the uncomfortable reality, was finally being dragged into the harsh light. Mr. Harrison's jaw tightened. "Leo, I simply gave you an opportunity to share your talent with the class." He tried to regain his footing, to reassert his authority, but the words sounded hollow even to him. Leo shook his head, a faint, almost imperceptible smile playing on his lips. "No, Mr. Harrison, you gave me an opportunity to expose your expectations." The silence that followed was deafening. It wasn't just a silence, it was a collective intake of breath, a recognition of a truth that had long festered beneath the surface. It was a stunning plot twist, not in the narrative, but in the power dynamic of the room. The quiet, overlooked student had just dismantled the imposing authority figure, not with anger, but with pure, unadulterated honesty. Suddenly, the students found their voices. Ben, the jock who had been initially skeptical, now spoke up, his arms still crossed but his tone devoid of irony. "He's right, Mr. Harrison. You act like you're doing us a favor, but you never give guys like Leo a real chance. You already decide who's good before they even play a note." Other students nodded, a quiet chorus of agreement building. Maya, her eyes blazing with newfound admiration, added, "It's always been about who you expect to be talented, not who actually is." Mr. Harrison's face flushed, his composure shattered. He tried to interrupt, to demand silence, but his words lacked their usual bite. The carefully constructed facade of his authority was crumbling before his eyes. He, who had always commanded absolute control, now looked small, flustered, and profoundly uncomfortable. The very foundation of his teaching method, rooted in bias and prejudgment, had been laid bare by a simple, honest challenge from a student he deemed insignificant. The rest of the class continued, but it was a mere formality. Mr. Harrison attempted to revert to his lesson plan, his voice flat, his movements stiff. But the students were no longer engaged in the same way. Their eyes kept flicking to Leo, then to Mr. Harrison, a silent understanding passing between them. The rigid structure of the class, once dictated by Mr. Harrison's unassailable authority, now felt brittle, cracked. The lesson wasn't about music theory anymore. It was about the uncomfortable truth of prejudice, about the power of an unseen voice, and about the courage to speak it. The tide had truly shifted, and in that small music room, a quiet revolution had just begun. And the echoes of that truth would soon ripple far beyond its walls. The final bell shrilled, usually a sound of liberation, but today it was different. Chairs scraped, backpacks zipped, but the usual chaotic rush out the door was replaced by a sense of lingering awe. Students moved slowly, their eyes still wide, their murmurs not about weekend plans, but about the symphony they just witnessed. Leo, gathering his things, felt a new energy in the room. A subtle shift, like the earth itself had recalibrated. He was no longer a shadow, he was a presence. As he turned to leave, a cluster of students gravitated towards him. Ben, the jock, slapped him on the shoulder, a genuine grin splitting his face. "Dude, that was insane. Where did you learn to play like that? You've been holding out on us." Others chimed in, their voices filled with genuine respect. Maya approached, her eyes shining. "Leo," she said softly, a quiet intensity in her voice. "That was beautiful. Thank you for that." It wasn't just praise, it was an acknowledgement, a recognition of something profound. It was a powerful lesson in itself. True talent, true character will always find a way to shine through, no matter how hard others try to dim it. Just as Leo reached the doorway, a voice, clipped and sharp, cut through the buzzing chatter. "Leo!" It was Mr. Harrison. He stood by his desk, arms still crossed, his face a carefully constructed mask of his former authority. For a fleeting second, Leo saw a flicker of something in his eyes, perhaps a sliver of regret, a hint of vulnerability. He almost expected an apology, or at least an admission, but then the mask solidified. "Remember, Leo," Mr. Harrison stated, his voice regaining its usual stern edge, "this is still my classroom." Leo met his gaze, unflinching. The weight he'd carried for so long, the constant feeling of being overlooked, had lifted. He felt a profound sense of calm. A small, knowing smile touched his lips. "I know, Mr. Harrison," Leo replied, his voice soft but unwavering. "And now, so does everyone else." He turned and walked out of the classroom, leaving Mr. Harrison standing alone, surrounded by the echoes of a truth he could no longer deny. Stepping out into the late afternoon sun, Leo felt a lightness he hadn't experienced in years. The air in Harmony, Georgia, seemed to hum with a new, vibrant tune. He wasn't just walking home, he was floating. He pictured his grandmother's smiling face, feeling her spirit in the gentle breeze. Her lessons weren't just about music. They were about resilience, about finding your voice when the world tries to silence you. And today, his music had roared. The story isn't just about a piano or a classroom or even a single teacher. It's a testament to the power within each of us. For anyone who's ever felt invisible, for every dream that's been dismissed, for every talent that's been overlooked, remember Leo. Remember that sometimes the greatest battles aren't fought with fists, but with passion. When others try to shrink you, when they try to underestimate you, the best thing you can do is let your talent speak louder than their doubt. And when you do, they'll have no choice but to listen. Your light is your own, and it's brighter than any shadow they cast. Don't wait for permission to shine. Your moment is coming. And when it does, make sure they listen.